Loyal readers often become members because they crave a sense of community, but communities are complicated and take many different forms. Researchers Rohan Grover and Jennifer Kho are going to join us to share the diverse tactics, strategies, and operational considerations that help newsrooms cultivate member communities based on their study of foreign newsrooms. Rohan is a doctoral student at the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism at the University of Southern California, where he researches how digital technology shapes civic engagement in news, politics, and activism. From 2019 to 2021, Rohan was a senior product manager at HuffPost, where he led product strategy for HuffPost's most loyal users through membership, mobile apps, and digital experiences. Jennifer Kho is a digital news strategy leader who serves as a senior advisor for Cannery Media and a consultant for Capital and Maine and the Wrap. She most recently served as the director of strategic initiatives for Huffington Post, where she led the development of new audience engagement, storytelling, and revenue models. And Rohan and Jennifer will be joined by two individuals from Honolulu Civil Beat, one of the newsrooms that they studied. Mariko is Civil Beat's membership and events manager. In her current role in Major Gifts, Mariko supports the newsroom's relationships with foundations and individual donors to further their investment and impact. And Ben Nishimoto, who is joining us at, I think, 3:30 in the morning his time. So thank you, Ben, for that. He's the Vice President of Operations and Philanthropy for Honolulu Civil Beat. He's responsible for executing revenue, engagement, and operating strategies for small newsrooms. And I will stop sharing now and hand this over to you, Rohan.
Thanks, Ariel. Let me just get my screen sharing set up. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Jen and I are so excited to be here with you all on the first day of the membership summit. As Ariel mentioned, we're here to talk about a research project that we just completed about growing membership programs by cultivating a community of members. So we just published our report on the Membership Puzzle Project's website, and we just wanted to share with you a few things that we learned. So we have a short presentation for about 10 or 15 minutes. Then we'll do the Q&A with Ben and Mariko, and then we'll take questions at the end. And I just want to call out here that this image we have on this slide is from an event run by Tortoise. These events are called Think-ins, and you can kind of visually see how engaged this community of audience is at one of their events, but we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. All right, so at HuffPost, as Ariel mentioned, well, Jen and I led our membership program from launch in 2018 through 2020. And when we launched, we originally expected that members would join either because they wanted to give something, like by supporting HuffPost, or because they wanted to get something like access to features or discounts or merchandise. So we were a little bit surprised when our members told us that they joined because they were in fact most interested in joining the HuffPost community. This came through in surveys and member interviews and also in A/B testing. So we built our membership strategy around this idea of cultivating a community through things like events and forums and callouts and our comments section. We had a lot of questions along the way, some of which we tried to answer on our own with our experiments, and others that we weren't able to answer completely in our own work. So we posed this question, this research project, to Ariel and Jay, and for the past couple of months, we've been pursuing these questions like, what does a healthy community look like, and how do we define that to both newsrooms and to members? How can we measure this idea of community? What are other newsrooms doing? What has and hasn't worked from them? And then what can we learn from each other? So our goal with this study is to provide other journalists with a resource that can help you build successful membership programs when your vision of membership includes cultivating a community of members, and then to understand how to build a healthy community by investing in different tools and strategies. So we interviewed staff and members from 4 newsrooms: the Honolulu Civil Beat in Hawaii, Kraut Reporter in Germany, the News Minute in South India, and Tortoise, which is based in the UK. We specifically chose newsrooms that are different from each other. So they all have what Emily talked about in terms of thick membership programs, but they serve different audiences in different countries around the world, and they follow different models of both journalism and membership programs. So for example, the Civil Beat and the News Minute keep their content open to the public and offer an enhanced experience through membership, whereas Kraut Reporter and Tortoise really expect their audiences to join in order to access core content and experiences. So by increasing the variety of our newsrooms that we studied, we learned things that are hopefully widely applicable, no matter what kind of membership program you're building, while also capturing enough detail about what each newsroom's journey has been. Crucially, we also wanted to speak with both people in newsrooms who run membership programs, but also with the members themselves, who could tell us in their own words what community means to them and how they relate to their membership experience. So now let's get started into what we learned. One of the first lessons that we wanted folks to take away is that there isn't a single way to build community. When we began this project, we thought that there might be a universal strategy that we can unearth. And while we did find that some newsrooms shared similar experiences, overall, we saw a lot of variety across these newsrooms, as you can see in this table. So the way to read this is that we have the four columns that each one represents one of the newsrooms that we studied. And in each row, we have a different community engagement strategy. So we can kind of visually see within each row how many newsrooms have adopted that strategy as part of their membership program. The strategies are comments, open editorial meetings, events, surveys, forums, and newsletters. Then we have the other row on the bottom. I know the text is a little bit small, so it might be difficult to read, but the purpose of showing this here is that there is no universal tactic to build a community. So for example, the first row says comments, and we can see that 2 of the 4 newsrooms have really incorporated comments into their strategies. And then 3 of the 4 offer open editorial meetings in the next row, and so on. This was really interesting to us because we thought that both comments and events in particular are really crucial to building a community, promoting discourse between members and comments, and then allowing them to meet our journalists through events. At HuffPost, we had a lot of success in building relationships then by changing comments to be members only and by hosting these virtual events. And we did see that for Kraut Reporter, where members only comments are really important for creating a positive civil tone among members. But Tortoise, on the other hand, doesn't even allow comments in their articles. At the same time, while Tortoise holds multiple events per day, including an open editorial meeting that's open to members, but Kraut Reporter doesn't offer events at all. So we describe in our report how each newsroom uses these strategies and also which strategies play really crucial roles in different ways for each program based on that newsroom's vision for what community looks like. But for now, we just want to show visually that there is no universal path to success. Ultimately, each newsroom has built up a strategy based on what community means to them, which readers they wanted to engage, and the feedback they received from their members. At this point, you might be wondering, if these are such different strategies, then what does community mean to all these newsrooms? How are we defining it? Are we talking about the same thing? What even is community? So for that, I'll pass it over to Jen.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here today. So a few things that, one of the things that the first lessons that we learned was that there really isn't a single definition of a community. This became especially clear as we asked the 4 newsrooms and their members to describe a moment that epitomizes a strong, healthy community. The answers were different for different newsrooms, including people coming together to support one another when something goes wrong, engaging in civil discourse with people you disagree with, or having, sharing similar identities, perspectives on the world, or a connection to a place. But it was also really clear that for everyone we spoke with, the sense of community was really important. In the case of some members, even existential. For example, C.L. Tilney, a member of Tortoise, said she felt like Tortoise was her tribe more than anyone else she was associated with at the beginning of the pandemic, even though she lives in San Francisco and Tortoise is based in the UK. John McComas, a member of Honolulu Civil Beat, said Civil Beat was a rare source of optimism about the world for him. So we were pretty blown away by some of these answers. And we discuss a range of definitions in our report and call out some common features and even metrics that might be helpful to anyone looking to develop a community out of their members, including if you're wondering how to set goals and measure success. But some of the basic elements of community that stood out to us across all 4 newsrooms that we interviewed, and also that have been noted in some previous sociological and membership research about community, include some common ground that brings the community together, which also requires some idea of who isn't in the community, a feeling of fellowship or shared identity. Several people mentioned examples that shared themes about trust and vulnerability. For instance, Kora Yamamoto, a Civil Beat member, remembered a discussion about mental health in which speakers were really open and vulnerable as a moment that struck her with a strong sense of community. Also a mutual concern for each other's welfare, which is something that was identified in The Art of Community by Charles H. Vogel, and the ability to disagree were elements that a lot of people mentioned. a set of individual peer-to-peer relationships, and a social fabric of both weak and strong social ties. So both friendships and acquaintances, essentially, are also part of the definition, as are interactions beyond a single group or person, including your newsroom. So if the only interactions are directly involving you, then you have an audience, it sounds like, more than a community. So we also looked at the evolution and the way that things change in all of these news communities. Every community is really different. They evolve constantly, both as new people come in and also times and attitudes change along with the news cycle. So something that works 1 week, 2 weeks later, it might not work as well, and something else might work better. So being willing to listen and test hypotheses and assumptions and constantly adapt is a key to success, which the previous speakers also mentioned. One trend we heard about is that the founding members might end up being different from new members as the membership program expands, which can create some conflict. The workload balance, beyond anything else, first of all, between attracting new members and then serving or training existing members can be a constant struggle. But even the same people who join for one reason might need another reason or other reasons to stay and really engage as part of the community. As Katie Vanek Smith, publisher of Tortoise, put it, it's different for different members, but generally what you pay for and what you stay for are two different things. So people might join because they want to support the news or believe in the principle that more or different type of news is needed in their community, but might not continue to support the publication unless they find more to engage with once they're there. So these first three activities kind of on this chart, to be clear, are not really in a sequential order, but are more of like a constant cycle. As you experiment, that might change your messaging. As you do more listening, that might change what you want to experiment with in your hypotheses and change your messaging again and things like that. But some of the newsroom activities that we thought took membership interaction to the next level included opening editorial meetings to members, in the case of Tortoise, the News Minute, and Silverbeat, which means that members will hear about stories in some cases in advance of the publication. So that requires a level of trust and vulnerability, as discussed in the last slide. And also surveying members about their interest in stories in advance of publication in the case of Kraut Reporter. Some newsrooms regularly co-produce stories with members, such as at the News Minute, and Kraut Reporter even published, with permission, a civil but emotional email disagreement that a member had with the editor-in-chief about the pandemic coverage and the direction Kraut Reporter was going in. And with a small team and volunteers, the News Minute also runs a help hotline. It actually sounds like an information concierge for non-resident Indians, which we were kind of blown away with. All of this can lead to a newsrooms committed to the community approach with equally committed and involved communities, including those that we interviewed. One big sign of success, which is a self-sustaining community that might still persist in some way if the publication is no longer evolved. We were impressed with community members taking initiative, for instance, to collect donations for flood victims, file FOIA or Right to Information Act requests, start to manage social media channels, such as starting something on Discord for Kraut Reporter on behalf of the news communities, or planning events or hosting chats beyond the newsroom. An example of a self-sustaining community can be as simple as friendships that start up within the community and persist beyond the newsroom activities. At Tortoise, for instance, Katie Vanek Smith told us that 90% of the text chat during the events are private one-on-one interactions among their members, not involving anyone in the newsroom. She said even her mom kept talking about all the friends she had made and how she was going to hang out with them and stuff, which she was surprised by. So these are some of the things that we discovered during the research.
So one final takeaway is that pursuing a community-driven approach to membership might mean that you face some tension between growth and community. So what does that mean? Well, with a growth-driven approach, you want to add paying members as quickly as possible. Success is measured strictly in terms of new membership growth. With a community-driven approach, you would prioritize growing a community of members, in which case who your members are and how they're engaging with you is also important alongside how much revenue they bring this month. So for example, you might consider offering an incentive like an ad-free experience or a t-shirt. While these things might bring you more members and more revenue in the short term, they may not contribute to the community that you're trying to build because they don't build relationships between members and the newsroom. Of course, a community should make business sense, but a community-driven approach sets you up for longer-term success. That's what we found from these newsrooms. And that's because if you're trying to attract active members of your community, luring them with transactional benefits can be counterproductive if it doesn't attract people interested in engaging with you in that way. This came up with a few of the newsrooms that we spoke to, but Mariko from the Civil Beat put it best when she framed it as learning that some of the readers and members didn't have strong ties with the work and their core mission. And now they have to accept a level of attrition and focus on engaging their members who really are there to align with their community-driven strategy. So now that we've talked about different engagement strategies to cultivate community, how we define community, and what success looks like, and some of the challenges and stages and opportunities that come up along the way in the process of building a community of members, now we're going to do a little interview with Ben and Mariko. So I'll hand it back to Jen, who's going to lead a Q&A with both of them from the Civil Beat.
Thanks so much. Go ahead and move to the next slide. Cool. So it is now my pleasure to bring up two awesome people from the Honolulu Civil Beat. Ben Nishimoto, which, as Ariel said, he's the Vice President of Operations and Philanthropy for Civil Beat, responsible for executing revenue, engagement, and operating strategies. And Mariko Chang, Major Gifts Consultant, who joined in September of 2016 as the newsroom's membership and events manager, and in her current role supports the newsroom's relationships with foundations and individual donors to further their investment and impact. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ben and Mariko, especially at this brutally early hour for you in Hawaii, Ben. It was such a pleasure getting to hear about your experiences with community building while doing this research.
Thanks. We're
I want to be sure you guys are able to talk.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
There we go.
Awesome.
Good morning from my end of the world.
Good morning. So one of the key things that we talked about, Ben, was trust and sort of how important it is for your readers to get to know your journalists, and also for the newsroom to get to know your members as well. So I wanted to start with you talking to folks on the call today about your motivation to launch membership and focus on community.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. So, I came to Civil Beat from PBS Hawaii, public television here in America. And, if there's one thing that PBS prides itself on, it's on trust. And, PBS had about 50 years to cultivate that among their readers. But they love to say that they've, based on surveys, have been the most trusted institution for the past 17 years. And that they continue to sort of outscore government institutions and media sources, commercial broadcast, cable television, newspapers, both in trust and value among their readers. And I think strictly because of that is why they've had such a successful fundraising operation, especially over the past 10 to 15 years, where in addition to federal support, they've been able to raise a substantial amount from viewers like you, as they like to say. So I think when I came to Civil Beat, we had to figure out a way to create this, what they call a halo effect within a short period of time. Civil Beat, when Mariko and I came on board, was about 5 years old, and we had just transitioned from a for-profit paywall news operation to a nonprofit organization with revenue generated from principally from members and donors. So we had to try and find a way to generate that trust quickly and use that trust to build the basis for a growing community here. And I think we decided the best way to do that is to just basically, optimize our newsroom based on trust and become radically transparent. So making sure that all of our readers understood where we were coming from, transparent with our mission, transparent with our staff, position them as much as possible as subject matter experts within our communities, get them out there, show readers how the sausage is made and, how journalism works behind the scenes, be transparent with how we raise money and the types of donors that we're bringing on board, the types of ethical questions that we deal with from a fundraising and editorial perspective. Those are all things we just wanted to put out there and basically tell our readers, this is everything we are. It's up to you whether you want to support us or not, but we really do need your support. And that seems to have really resonated with the readership.
Thank you so much for that. Another thing we were fascinated by was your view of the funnel from sort of casual to core readers to donors, and how you design different types of events and other activities like newsletters and calls to action to attract these different audience segments and move them, well, down the funnel, although some of them are not always exactly like, sequential, I think, right straight down. Can the two guys, talk about how the strategy has helped you engage new members as part of your community and build meaningful relationships with them?
Sure. So I'm trying to guzzle as much coffee as I possibly can.
Oh, I totally get it. I'm down for that.
So the funnel is really important, so we're not, we don't have ads on our site. So all of our revenue is made up from individuals and donors through tax deductible gifts. So for us, reach isn't our North Star metric, it's loyalty. And the best way for us to visualize loyalty and to create tactics at each level to move them into converting from readers to donors is sort of the funnel concept. So, at the top of the funnel, you have casual readers that come in for a story or two, and we want to make sure we capture them and create as many touch points as possible between the new reader to Civil Beat and our mission and the core things that we do. So, for us, email works really well. It's a great way for us to slowly, through a drip campaign, inform readers on our history and our mission, who we are. Again, that whole issue of transparency. And then, as they move down the funnel and read more of our content, introducing them to sort of ancillary aspects of what we do, such as events, which is a big part. Even during the pandemic, digital events have been really popular for us. Again, getting to know our reporters and editors on a more personal level. Those are all things that get them through the funnel and eventually entice them to become donors, recurring donors, and then major donors.
Thanks so much for that. As you've kind of grown and expanded from members in Hawaii to people who have moved, or even people with Hawaiian ancestry around the world, how have you navigated serving these different audiences? The evolution from founding members to new members is something that other newsrooms have found can create some tension and conflict. And also, just because there's only so much time in a day for a small team and everything needs to be prioritized, I wonder if that's something you can talk about.
Sure. Mariko, did you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if that was necessarily something, very conscious at the get-go. Hawaii is a very unique place in which there are folks that come to us seasonally, and they may live on the continental United States. But because they either, have a home, spend a good portion of the year, their readership kind of continues while they continue to plug in as to what's happening in the state of Hawaii. We did a couple of projects, though. For example, really wanted to connect with the Native Hawaiian diaspora, a project that we launched that was podcast-based. And with that episodic season, which was focused on kind of identity and Hawaiian culture and what's happening historically to modern day, we were able to cultivate a small community of folks that were really interested in this topic. And after each episode aired or dropped, we would kind of convene together on Zoom kind of to talk about the issues that came up. So that was a really interesting project for us to identify a very specific kind of segment of our membership and readership. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think you talked about even how as part of the podcast, there was actually a group, right, of events and everything that some of your members even continued beyond you ending the podcast and everything, right? Which was really astounding, an example of self-sustaining community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, because the topic was so personal and emotional, folks really identified with one another, invited, at the time they were thinking we would get together for a potluck and meet face to face and share food and stories. But yeah, towards the end of that season, we really struggled with how do we hand this community off? Where do we place them so that kind of this rich conversation can continue? And to this day, actually, some of our reporters continue to report, of course, on Native Hawaiian issues, and they are a group that we can continue to kind of reach out to, share, more current stories with, or other projects that Civil Beat continues to evolve with.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll quickly add is, as our community has grown and revenue has grown for us, we came to the quick realization that, our goal shouldn't be to be everything to everyone, right? It's okay for our readers to like certain aspects of what we do and go deeply into certain parts of our mission, and then either disagree or be disinterested in other parts of what we do. It's really the depth, not the breadth of that's sort of what we're looking for. And that's worked out well for us. We don't want readers to have an allegiance to us. We sort of want them to trust us, so when we do have these disagreements, or when they don't agree, there's still that basis of understanding that we can always go back to.
Thank you. Now, the time has just flown by, so I guess I'll have time for just one more question. I had prepared so many. Something that came up in the conversations with both the members we spoke with, John McComas and Cora Yamamoto, is the feeling that you are a force for good in their community in Hawaii, not just a source for information. And that's part of why they're so loyal. The reactions speak to something you both talked about in terms of Civil Beat engaging with existing communities rather than trying to kind of build the communities from scratch. For instance, by hosting an event with a criminal justice reporter that brings together people who already know each other from outside of Civil Beat, or reaching out to specific island communities, or inviting storytellers who then invite their communities to join your events. Can you talk about sort of if you could intentionally build the membership community around your already existing communities, and how it has helped or shaped how you think about membership program growth, and sort of how some of the examples of success that you've seen?
Sure. So I think, for us, in reading your report, it was really cool hearing from Cora and John, but also interesting in that, Cora viewed Civil Beat as creating community and being, she was thrilled to be a part of the community. She sort of said all the right things. John, on the other hand, said, he doesn't think he was part of the Civil Beat community and was more of an advocate. And to us, both of those relationships work well, particularly from a long-term fundraising perspective. I think, misinformation is a common enemy, and even among local news. And it's something that I think people can rally around, especially Civil Beat's core readers who have sort of the media literacy and can understand, the headwinds that Civil Beat and other news organizations are up against. So, in someone like John's case, he was an established CEO here. And I'm sure he's communicated with our reporters in a different capacity while a CEO here. He's since retired and is sort of, in a different role, but he finds value in Civil Beat. I can understand that he doesn't see us as part of his community because he has communities elsewhere. But I think what we're really looking for is, community based on trust and, value based on trust. We do feel that everything goes back to that. So whatever they want to call our relationship with us, we're sort of fine with, as long as they trust what we're doing.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's just interesting. Just one note about that is that people did have so many different definitions of community. And so it was really interesting that this didn't just happen with your members. There's other members where people thought they would or wouldn't associate with community, and actually they did the opposite, right? And it's just I think the word community is just people have a very specific understanding of what that means, which kind of the last panel also talked about, And so I thought that was just so interesting that just even the word was so much more divisive than I thought it would be. Even though, if you look at the elements, I think there are people who definitely, as you say, would seem to be part of it. They're at every event, So Great. Well, I have lots of questions, but I see that there's so many questions in the Q&A box. So we're going to, I think, move to some of those next. And if we somehow run out, then I'll definitely get back to some of these other questions. But
Rohan,
did you want to choose one from
yeah, sure.
many good questions we've got in there?
I can moderate. Thanks, Ben and Mariko. So I'll just go through the questions sort of in order. So the first one is from Jacques that asks, did you find that mutual concern for each other in both thin and thick membership programs? So when we were choosing newsrooms to interview for the study, we actually kind of preferred thick membership programs because, as Emily talked about, thin membership programs probably don't build much of a community around them. It's mostly about having a sort of donation or support relationship rather than really deeply engaging with members. And so we kind of only looked at and talked to thick membership programs. And so I imagine that might be a feature specific to developing a community or more deeply engaging your members. The next question is.
Well, I would like to say that one thing about that is we actually did have conversations with a lot of other newsrooms before actually picking the ones that we were going to go more deeply with in this research. And actually, I think it's disconnected. We chose to focus on thick memberships when we kind of picked the few that we were going to kind of talk to them and their members and things like that, just because they were more likely to put us in touch. They're more willing to put us in touch with members and stuff like that. Like they were more willing to talk about the way that community was part of their strategy. But I do think it's not that related. Like it's very possible to have the mutual concern for each other and community in a place that doesn't have any membership, right? It's really actually a different thing from membership entirely. It's just a matter of whether the newsrooms found it a priority enough to actually want to talk to us about it, which is why we kind of picked thick membership.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Jen, because actually now that I'm thinking about it a bit more, in our experience at HuffPost, our members wanted a community before we even built one, right? So they already had a relationship to each other. They wanted to cultivate more deeply through membership. And that was a learning for us. It wasn't like we created a community for people to come to join. People wanted that relationship already with each other. And for us, I think Commons was a primary site where that happened well before we had an official membership program. So yeah, that's a great point, that it can exist without a thick membership program necessarily. The next question is from maybe Evie. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, I'm so sorry. But they ask, if members do not initiate any activities beyond the newsroom, does this mean it's unhealthy? Do we have to, oh, it jumped, sorry. Sorry, 1 second. Oh, do we have to make it a goal, having members do things beyond the newsroom? Jen, do you want to answer this one?
No, I don't think it's like we're saying that these are things that you have to or don't have to do. It's just a sign, one sign of a healthy community where we think that the community would persist kind of beyond the actual engagement and activities of the newsroom. And also that, there's enough ties between the members that and the members and your newsroom that they're likely to want to stick around, basically. And so retention might be a bit easier, but that's just a hypothesis. We weren't able to prove that with numbers or anything like that. I'd love to know if Ben and Mariko, if you have anything to add to that. Nope. Okay.
I think you covered it. I think I would just add, in general, just that slide that where Jen talked about the different kind of characteristics of a healthy community isn't meant to be like, you must get a 10 out of 10 on this quiz in order to pass and have a good community of members. It was more about, there's a variety of features that we saw among communities that were successful and healthy in different ways, but it's not like a sort of a checklist that you have to complete in order to to win a race, So the next question is from Jay, who asks, did you find that strong communities allow journalists to tell uncomfortable truths to members, including things that your strongest supporters maybe do not want to hear? So for that, we had a great, we didn't kind of ask that question broadly, but it bubbled up through a few of our interviews. But one of them was from Leon from Crowd Reporter, who gave us a great anecdote we describe in detail in the report. about a member who really didn't like crowd reporters' coverage of the pandemic and the kind of state imposing rules about public
Lockdown.
like that and the lockdown. Initially, it was an individual email exchange between that member and one of the senior staff at Crowd Reporter. Because this person was a founding member who had been part of Crowd Reporter for, I think, 4 years or so, and they had this really deep relationship with the staff at Crowd Reporter, they were able to reach out, have this email exchange that ended up going on for like quite a few emails, and was ultimately really constructive in helping the newsroom kind of explain why it was important to cover the state's policies in the ways that it did. And they actually ended up publishing that exact email exchange as an article on their with the members' consent, in order to show for the rest of the Crowd Reporter community what constructive disagreement can look like. And so that was, I thought, a great example of how they were able to kind of push the boundaries of what maybe a journalist who isn't in touch with their members or their audience is able to do when you have the sense of community that is built upon these individual relationships among and between the newsroom and your members.
Yeah, and also Tortoise said that like a big part of their community was actually built on that disagreement, right? Like the desire to be able to have these healthy disagreements was a big part of how they even constructed their membership and attracted people. But Ben and Mariko, if you have any examples to share as well, please feel free to jump in.
Actually, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Mariko.
No, I actually think that for members to say that, I'm new to the news industry, and so wasn't really used to kind of the confrontation at the beginning, but now I just see that that's kind of like, a regular occurrence. And yet when one of our members shares with us that they may not disagree with something, and yet they still choose to support us because of the value that we bring as a whole in different areas of what we write about, is one of the most flattering things I think they can really share with us.
Ben, did you want to jump in too?
Mariko said it much better than I did.
Okay, great. I thought that was interesting when you said that people had sometimes said like, oh, we're going to cancel our membership, and then they don't, right? Because it turns out even if they disagree with one piece of content, there's other pieces as well, that they actually really like. So,
and it's fascinating because we have those metrics, right? Because we can see that they continue to read or open up our newsletter. So we know that they're still kind of within their wheelhouse, and hopefully in time, those emotions kind of fade, and they're able to kind of come back because, of course, yeah, they do find value in what we deliver.
I think we have time for just one last question quickly. Do you feel that the pandemic changed the stakes on both sides in terms of community engagement that leads to support? And if so, how? Jen, do you want to take this one?
well, I see Ben has his speaker off. Did you want to say something, Ben?
Sure, I can jump in here. So I think for us, the pandemic has changed the way we do a lot of things, and in particular, building community. Prior to the pandemic, we really put a premium on in-person events. We held between 3 to 5 per month. And we really wanted to, break down as many barriers between the newsroom and our readers. We wanted to position our reporters as subject matter experts, and that required just shaking hands and getting to know one another, getting to know our readers, meeting them in person. When we pivoted to online out of necessity, that was something we were worried about. Like, are we going to lose that one-to-one connection? And it turns out we didn't. We went all in on online. Our events are more popular than ever before. And we've been able to, by prioritizing digital events, reach out to neighbor island communities and those outside of urban Honolulu that perhaps we had been ignoring to a certain extent with our engagement for the past couple of years. So we've been able to hear a more diverse set of voices. It's not as personal as it was before, but we've been able to expand our reach for sure.
Yeah.
If I could add something really quick, I know a lot of newsrooms are kind of struggling with the COVID pandemic readership being one that's very fleeting, because of course we've received a lot more kind of attention to the stories of breaking news and such. And I've been thinking about this a little bit more recently as we all try to kind of build that loyalty and retain those members and renew them this year. And it's just, you know, for us at Civil Beat, I'm really glad that on the editorial side, they've taken health coverage and really kind of infused that in the areas, in the different beats. So for example, economy coverage is talking still about COVID, but more broadly about businesses and tourism in Hawaii. And I think that's a way to kind of introduce those readers, that new segment of readers, to kind of what we do more largely as more broadly as an organization. So yeah, hopefully it's still, yeah, somewhat important to their daily lives.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're out of time now. So we'd love to just kick it to Ariel, but thank you so much for joining us today, especially so early. And I really loved the discussion and loved all that you contributed to the report. Thank you.